Hi, and welcome back to Studio B, here for episode 2 of... Oh, no, my light is not on. Nope. That is not working. Alright. Change this out. There we go. There we go. Welcome back to the studio for the second episode of this mushroom madness. If you remember in the last episode we had completed our domed cap mushroom with a stem, and we were going to be moving on to the second mushroom here, which I chose to try a morel. And so I did a little bit of work off camera, just trying to prototype a little bit, and I underestimated the amount of material I was going to need to try to create a morel. But I did achieve something that is quite unique looking. Just on a much smaller scale than I would have hoped. So, even though this is not exactly what I wanted, it still is going to serve a purpose on this board that, I've kind of got it logged away as to what I wish to use it for, but we'll get into that later. But in doing so, I learned a few different things, but mainly I was going to need a bit more material to get a cap roughly around this size. And this is what I'm going to be using, is a small soup can that I cut off roughly around halfway. And I hope to draw this top out this way into a point, and then kind of work the sides and the corrugations out and achieve a morel shape for the most part. And then I'll use another piece of steel to construct a stem that will attach to the board. So that's gonna be the next portion of this video. So I'm gonna just, it's gonna be more or less what you've seen before, me working on the board and then drawing this thing out, but I'll do some shots in between and show you guys some of the progress. So with our board set up here, and our tin can is now all cleaned out and ready to go for forming. The issue we have is that, so for me to hammer the center down there, I would have to crush these sides, and I'm looking to keep these together as much as possible. So you can see the problem, right? So the depth of this is, I don't know, 3 inches. Let's say 3, no. The depth of this is probably, I don't know, maybe 1.5 inches or so. And so to get down there, I think I'm going to use the braiding block. I mean, it's a nice solid chunk of hardwood. It shouldn't split apart too bad, because I'm not going to be hammering it to pieces. But it's kind of hard to keep on center, and, it kind of wants to wiggle around a little bit. So just wrapping it in a rag. And then stuffing it in the can. Give it a few taps. That thing is now pushing right on the center of this can. That's going to save me quite a bit of time in trying to use a punch, so I can move a lot of material very quickly. And the other thing I kind of want to show here is this board. It's hard to tell, certainly on video, just the different depth of grooves that I have carved into it. But I kind of found a way here. You remember seeing the light at the beginning of the video? Well, this is why it's here. So I have some pretty complex contours to be able to work against on that. But for this purpose, I'm looking for the deepest one. And I'm going to place the very center of this over the deepest point. And hammer away and see what happens. I want to make sure I don't actually punch through. That's coming okay. Yeah, moving a lot of steel there. So with the aid of this braiding block, we were able to get that center domed out quite a bit. Now I have to work on this rolled edge with a punch and something like that. Just kind of push that out so that I'm able to continue with the doming. So we've drawn out this this end piece really substantially now with the block and rag inside. I just had to, it wasn't quite deep enough on the board, so I just put another board beside it and then worked in the groove, and I was able to get quite a bit more depth out of it. But as you can see here, I've gone ahead and done a little bit of distressing on one side, and here and here. So if you can picture those kinds of wrinkles all the way around, carrying that kind of texture all the way down the sides, what that's going to do, hopefully, is going to make a very, very close copy to a morel without getting too far into the details of it. So I'm going to hammer away on it here, and I'm going to cut back when I've got something that looks quite a bit more like a morel. So a bit of a jump in progress here. We went ahead and completed all of the forming on this morel cap, as well as I hammered out a stem that fits inside. I'm not sure on the height on that yet, but this thing turned out pretty good. And what I ended up doing with this, apart from having the rags stuffed in, eventually I got it to a diameter that the block wouldn't fit in anymore. So I took the block out and then just worked against this piece of rod, which I put in the center, and then stuffed rags around it, and then I worked against that, so it was almost like filling it with sand or another medium. But in the end, I was able to get quite a bit of texture without a lot of continuity in the design, which is fine by me. But I think in the end that this morel is, once I get it soldered together, is going to be a nice addition to this board. So just to recap, we now have a morel that is in solder ready condition. And we have this, let's call it a field mushroom or a mushroom, in solder ready condition. And I'm looking to put a few more on here. And I've been, playing with a couple of ideas. But, there are some really small clusters that you see of, like really small capped, high-peaked mushrooms. They're psilocybin or whatever you want to call them. But I was messing around with some copper pennies. And I mean proper copper pennies, not new pennies. Because new pennies are more zinc than they are copper, so anything 80s and under usually does a trick. But yeah, so I've been using these two aluminum blocks, which I cast out of a smelter that I have here made up, and when they cool, they have a big divot in the center. So what I'm able to do is put the copper slug on there like that, and then dish it slightly, and then move to the much more concave surface, and then really dish it out. and finish it off with a rounded off punch. So that's what I'm going to do here. And then for the stem, oops, that's acid. And for the stem, we're going to use some of the 5-strand copper wire. And we're going to see what we can do with that to try to put together a small cluster of like psilocybin or something along those lines. So I'm going to do some shots in between, and then I'll come back to you guys when I have another cluster made. after that little montage, this is where we are now. We have 10 caps total. So we have a ton of the copper topped ones. This will eventually be bundled up. That turned out really nicely. So we have just under a half a dozen of those. We have a little guy here that's supposed to represent a button stage mushroom, although I couldn't get the edges curled down. Still is quite whimsical, and I think it'll fit well. And we have a couple more here. This one has a crinkled edge. And this one is just domed out with a slight finish. So all of these stems are really straight and stuff right now, so I'll be doing some texturing and bending to those. As well, I think off camera, so you guys have seen me do soldering in the Copper Rose project. And it's quite an interesting process. And I'll be doing soldering on these multiple different pieces here. And I think I'm probably going to do it off camera, because it's quite hard to pick up on camera. But you can see this joint right here. So the last time I used a big old soldering iron, and the reason for that is the copper was a giant heat sink. Well, this time I have an industrial soldering iron gun. This thing gets super hot, super quick, and that'll afford me the opportunity to just be able to solder these really quickly. There's no fanfare about it, really. It's just you paste the joint and then you run solder along it. One of the things I would like to note, I will be using a silver bearing solder on the metal. Just the 50-50, it'll work okay, but I just want to make sure that these bonds really hold, and the silver solder, or the silver bearing solder, is going to ensure that. But all that being said, I think that this is going to close out the second video in this series, and when I come back, all of these mushrooms will be assembled and soldered together. I'm just going to use a small little piece of sheet metal for a base, and I will be putting more than likely wire from the center out, and that will give me the opportunity to pin it to the board. So I'm going to do that soldering and putting those wires in off camera. And in the next video when I come back, all of that's going to be assembled and ready to go. And we can start to do some placement on this board here and figure out exactly what our heights are going to be and stuff like that, along with these little bundles. And that'll give us a way better idea as to the size of the fairy or fey creations. Anyhow, if you guys have made it this far, thank you so much, and take care, and we'll see you in the next one.